This
Giannis,
conference will now be recorded.
All right,
I won't
Gavin.
be. Thanks, Giannis. I won't be watching the chat, Giannis. So if you wouldn't mind just shouting out if there's any questions or anything. And I saw Evo just joined as well. So hey, Evo, nice to have you. Thanks everyone for your time today. Really appreciate it. As Giannis mentioned, we have our accessibility annual update in October. So we're going to just quickly touch on why accessibility as an overview. We're going to look at why it's become more and more important every month, every year, all the time, and especially why it's relevant now. I'm really looking forward to sharing our own story, what we're doing at the moment, which is reaching for AAA. So we're taking our own rebrand, and I'll share some of the details with you, uncut there. And also, we'll take a look at what's coming in terms of the world of accessibility. There's a lot of new things happening that you should know about from a usability and design perspective, and also from content. And then finally, we're going to look at just some quick tips on building your business case to drive accessibility in your organization. So firstly, I'm going to just touch on accessibility lives within what we look at as inclusive design. So it's important we understand inclusive design first and then think downwards towards accessibility. This is a great picture. I don't know the author. I've looked on the online, but it's a lovely picture that describes a lot about what inclusive design covers, I think. So equality, where we're all, got the same equally distributed assets, and we're trying to watch the game, but we all have sort of different levels of privilege, really. And then where we have equity, where the assets are distributed and everyone can see the game. But why not go for this liberation on the far right, where why have the barrier at all? And I think inclusive design is really that aim on the far right. Inclusive design includes sort of lots of different areas, primarily the physical, the cognitive, and the sensory. And you can kind of look around here and see how all of these items are categorized and how we need to, when we're designing a product or even a service, what we need to think of to make sure that it's inclusive for somebody. And that might be, do we need to consider how they would touch the product? Do they need sort of dexterity or strength to use the product? And what are their cognitive skills required? Do they need a longer than normal attention span, or what is their memory need in terms of from a cognitive perspective? And what you'll see is that the standards and the guidelines are all built around these kind of topics. So firstly, we need to understand that disability, it's important to look at disability in a way that each of us at one point or other in our lives will have a disability. So if we look at disabilities as three primary types, one situational, such as a new parent, you're holding a new baby, you're trying to make a cup of tea, you've got a situational disability in that you're only able to use the one arm because of the baby. If you've got a temporary disability, maybe you've hurt your arm playing some sports, and obviously you'll be better in a couple of months and you'll be back to normal. Or someone who has actually only one arm and they are then permanently disabled. If you take that situational, temporary, and permanent and then look at it across our senses, it becomes quite interesting and helpful to then think of this from inclusivity. So a situational speaking disability is something like someone with a heavy accent, or a temporary hearing is someone who's suffering with an ear infection. They're going to be disabled temporarily with that situation. So this is a really nice thing. It's from Microsoft's design toolkit. So Microsoft's amazing with accessibility. I definitely encourage you to have a look at their resources online as well at that design toolkit. I just wanted to give you a little story about inclusive design and a brand called Oxo. They make kitchen gadgets. Oxo was it's a classic example that was created by a man called Sam Farber. His wife had arthritis in her hands and very bad arthritis, and he would see her struggling to use implements in the kitchen to cook, such as the potato peeler. And he actually created a lot of products designed specifically to help her and people in those situations. So we're just going to look at a couple of quick examples here around inclusive design. So I don't know if you've ever had the fun of trying to dry lettuce when it's wet and you're cleaning it. And I remember the first time I ever used one of these, and I was amazed at like, okay, this is an incredible device. The lettuce comes out beautiful, and I was thinking I couldn't improve this product. And actually, what Oxo did was they looked at this, and they looked at things like children's toys, and this one in particular. And then they came up with a new salad spinner where instead of having to have strength and dexterity and coordination to pull on the cord, I could now actually just hit the top and push down a much simpler improvement and much simpler user experience, which is I find really incredible to look at and see that you can take an already good product and make it actually almost feel perfect. So great example of that. They also, this is the original kind of classic potato peeler, and this is the sort of comfortable, easier to hold, easier to keep hold of potato peeler that they then made popular and sold. So how does this relate to web accessibility? What we do is basically web accessibility is the need to provide equal access and opportunity to all people to ensure that they have the knowledge they need to be confident in their life. And really what we want to do is improve the lives of people with disabilities. We want to capitalize on a wider audience, and that's a benefit of accessibility to an organization. And also, because accessibility is law almost globally now, it's very key to avoid lawsuits and also bad press for your brand. So from just some legal updates now in terms of things, from just under a month ago, 23rd of September in the UK, all public sector organizations must comply with the WCAG 2.1 standard. So their websites must be accessible. So that's things like all the universities, all the councils, all the schools and so forth. So it's a lot of organizations. They have had a few years to get ready for this, so it's not a surprise. But the UK government, what's called the Government Digital Service, GDS, is automatically monitoring and is reporting back and will be highlighting where they feel that organizations are not meeting the right level of standards. This exact same thing is also happening in the EU, right across Europe, European law, and also in the US. So the US is arguably the strongest because the American Disabilities Act, ADA, actually covers every kind of organization. So it makes it illegal to discriminate against anyone with a disability. Canada has an amazing set of laws and guidance around accessibility too, and have recently just updated theirs. They're definitely a leading light in the accessibility area. An interesting update for anyone who was familiar with the term Section 508, which is one of the kind of standards and guidelines particularly used in the US. What we've seen being involved in accessibility is that the Section 508, which is a slightly different, using many of the similar guidelines to the Wcag, now many organizations are actually using the WCAG 2.1 as the guideline. I think that's really good news because it actually makes using one standard globally, it makes it easy for us to aim to and achieve and measure and continuously kind of monitor. So Yanis has recently been sharing an amazing story. So the WCAG is started and maintained by an organization you probably know called the W3C. And this is the big battle that's just happened is the W3 have gone out to tender for a new CMS. And obviously they kept the entire process public. And the great thing here is really what we've seen is accessibility versus open source. Open source was mentioned in the RFP from the W3 as important. Things like WordPress got down from, say, the long list of 20 down to the last kind of 3. WordPress was then discounted because of the Gutenberg editor and many of the accessibility concerns of the content it created, but also as using the product, there were accessibility issues as well. So what happened is that despite the massive market share that WordPress has, and also obviously all the power of open source behind it, accessibility was chosen. They went with a organization, a UK-based organization actually, and a CMS called Craft CMS. Yanis has done a great blog post and a lot of content around this. I definitely encourage you to read it, particularly from an agency perspective. The link is in these slides, and it's a guest post that Yanis did. But they even published the winning proposal from the organization. I've forgotten their name, who run Craft CMS. And who have won the work with W3. Actually, if I looked through the proposal, and I did a word search for accessibility, and it was mentioned 36 times in the PDF, that one. So it showed that they led with accessibility, and they actually won the business with them. So the WCAG standard has 3 levels. There's A, there's AA, which most of the law and everyone aims for, and then there is AAA. AAA is the highest level of accessibility. And what you find is that all of us ask for AA, and I'm sure everyone who's been involved in accessibility or known of it for many years is familiar with that. You always kind of go for this AA idea. So now over a third of the WCAG success criteria are AAA. So actually that's a huge percentage that we are leaving out of the guidelines if we are only going for AA. So one of the ladies we work with in the US who runs an accessibility agency refers to the guidelines as the Kraken. So if you know what the Kraken is, it's this terrifying monster that destroys ships and life and limb and lives in the deep ocean. And the reason is that although the guidelines are amazing, they are very difficult to learn and understand, in a sense that there's no easy route in. Just as you start to think, oh, I'll attack it and learn it from this way, you kind of realize that there's another tentacle that's come around and grabbed you. So what I'd encourage you to do is don't be put off if you're trying to learn a bit about accessibility. Is, ask lots of questions. It's not easy to understand the guidelines. Accessibility is easy. The guidelines are very excellent, but very challenging to understand. Okay, so a little bit about our adventures and what we've done recently. So our brand is over 13 years old. We decided it's time for a brand refresh. And since accessibility is so important to us and to our customers, we thought, well, we'll just go for the AAA standard. So we'll go for the very top. I didn't realize how difficult that was going to be, and I thought I'd just share with you a couple of the adventures that we've had so far. So this is some emails from my designer who actually built our brand originally 13 years ago. We've continued working with that agency. They're called Tenacity Works, and James is the founder, and he starts out with this saying, "Hi, turns out accessible brands are hard work. We'll need to have an extended palette that works against light and dark." And so he's given sort of an initial idea here. And this was, some ideas of what we could do. So he's changed the font a little bit, and he's done a little bit with our logo and so on. And I just wanted to draw your attention to some of the things like the yellows and the oranges here and here as well. And a few days later, he's still doing some work on it. And he'd say, seriously, first time creating a brand that isn't all about aesthetics. The brighter yellow, greens, and orange will have to go. The reason is that they actually are not providing enough contrast in the legibility of the text. And there's mathematical formulas that go into and tools that will help you understand how to get to that level of contrast. But effectively, the yellows and oranges are basically out. So here is our initial palette. So quite bright greens, oranges, yellows. And then basically here's where we landed up once we were complying with the AAA standards. So if I just flick between those, what you see is the luminosity disappears. Basically, you lose the luminosity. It's a little bit better when you have a darker background, but it's still a challenge in terms of that. And we'll have a look at a couple of the tools that can help you to get there as well. So what I'll just do is show you a couple of bits from so this is still a work in progress, but this is kind of our design system that's being put in place. So what we've settled with is a very much simpler color set. So it's kind of just the green and this very, very dark blue, and then just some options here around the different areas. And as part of our design system, we've also put together, or James's company's put together, all of the different levels that are H1s, H2s, what the fonts will look like, etc. And this is the kind of deliverable that nowadays we need to do when we're working on a product. We need to make sure accessibility, and I'm sure all good designers are doing this. But if you're going for AAA, then just be aware that you're going to get a significant reduction in your number of options. Personally, I actually think that's a great thing from a design perspective, but as a business owner, it was quite painful to kind of lose a lot of the prettiness, in fact, of the colors. And just some more examples of kind of how the buttons are going to have to work. And then also things like the forms. What's also good with forms is to look at and not to describe, not just in forms, but in design in general for accessibility, to never just use color. You must always use, color and some sort of symbol like the arrow icon here, in case somebody has, color blindness, as an example. And we're still working on these different areas, but again, you can see the kind of use of color with supported by things like an icon and described in text as well. One of the final things I want to point out from our own brand design is, because of the limitation in color and then the need for the call to action to stand out more, we ended up going with the brightest color in the kind of palette, which was the red, to make the call to action stand out a bit higher on the page. So that's kind of our journey that's continuing. We aim to have that website live for this year, certainly, and perhaps I can share a bit more closer to the time when that is live. So look at the scope of just AAA, because there may be some elements in there that might feel sort of new to you. So the AAA guidelines are really some essential items that all brands and all organizations will need. And then it also covers off some rare cases that perhaps you won't need as an organization. I guess what's important is that the website is the best it can be for all of your users. That's why we want to go for AAA. So I just picked on some of the design criteria that I thought were interesting. Text and images of text must have a 7:1 minimum contrast ratio. So if you go for the AA, you only have a 4.5:1 ratio. So the AAA is a significantly higher contrast ratio, and that's where, from the design side, you lose a lot of the color options in terms of background and foreground. If you want to reach AAA, you must also have no images that contain text in the website. You must also, basically every single link on your web page must self-identify what the destination is. And the reason for this is that when a screen reader comes to the page and reads out the links, it's one of the worst kind of offenders in terms of usability, is that if a link is just unmarked and doesn't have like a title or an alt text to describe what is behind the link, there's no idea for the user whether they should visit that link or not. Section headings, so basically making sure that you have H1s, H2s, H3s in the right order, and you don't skip levels. So you create your content in a very good structure, and this is perfect for accessibility and for other reasons as well. I'll just pick on some content criterias. I know a lot of content people in the boy groups. So anytime unusual words are used in your content, you really should ensure that you use glossaries. If you use an abbreviation, you must provide an expanded form of the abbreviation. And if you look at reading levels, AAA says that you should ensure that someone who has 9 years of schooling can understand. So that's really sort of an early high schooler, probably. And then finally, on the content criteria, pronunciation. So if there's a word that, such as desert, which could be dessert or desert, or what's the other pronunciation? So you could either abandon dessert or a desert. And so you need to really help the screen readers pronounce correctly so that the person using the web page can understand the context of your content. So those are just some of the kind of content ones I wanted to have a quick look at. Also, in terms of skipping back to the UK, very interestingly, the government has just published what they expect as a minimum testing to be done using screen readers. So this is what they really have said as a minimum before you launch, and it's mentioning here 6 different assistive technologies that should be tested again. So I think the bench is really getting very high in terms of what they're expecting and demanding from organizations. Also, look ahead. At the moment, we're on WCAG 2.1 guidelines. WC 2.2 is meant to come out in November. It is delayed, and so it's expected at the moment in the spring of 2021. I'll have a quick, I just wanted to highlight a few areas that I thought were quite interesting. Really now for keyboard navigation, your focus indicator is making sure that it stands out from the background. If you want to reach AAA in the 2.2 land, you need to make sure that a 2 CSS pixel solid border around the controls is visible. This is really, really helpful in terms of using just the keyboard to navigate a website. If you've got some sort of interactive tool that requires dragging because of motor dexterity, they're basically, so if you imagine a slider, you should also provide an alternative means, such as the ability to tap or click on different areas, and not that the person has to grab the menu or whatever it is and slide it across. Another one is pointer targets. So this is a great usability improvement. If you must make sure that any target that you can interact with is 44 by 44 CSS pixels of space, and so that really means that it's easy to only click on that and not miss it and click on something else. A couple more ones that are coming out in 2.2 is Findable Help. So help is obviously so important for all website products, tools, etc. And also with authentication, basically, if there's a cognitive test such as CAPTCHA, to prove that you're human, there also needs to be an alternative way to authenticate that does not require a cognitive test. A good example of this is two-factor authentication as an alternative. I think this one has a very big impact on a lot of systems and people. A couple of tools that I'd encourage you to play with. Chrome. All the latest versions of Chrome have a very cool thing to look at. I'd encourage you to take your website and run this. If you see these three dots, if you inspect in Chrome, click on the three dots, go to the settings, and then inside the preferences, if you scroll down, you will find something saying, it's over here, emulate vision deficiencies, and you can look at your website through like blurred vision and through different types of color blindness as well. And I think it really helps you to understand how to get the key messages of your website across to someone who has a visual disability. This is kind of what an automated report looks like. And then finally, just to look at the business case, how to build your business case within your organization. 3 quick points. It's the right thing to do. It is the law, and it'll also improve all of your customer experiences. I hope that you can see from some of the guidelines we've covered and quickly looked at today that actually when you use the accessibility guidelines, you're not just helping people with, say, visual or hearing disabilities, you're actually helping all of your users to make a better product. In the UK, we're seeing many EDI officers, Equality, Diversity, Inclusion officers. They're enthusiastically taking over accessibility as under their wing in the organization. If you have an EDI officer in your organization, I'd encourage you to talk with them and see if you can kind of build the business case together. We've got several customers who've actually built that, and they've taken it up as the champion of accessibility, because quite often it can be difficult to find the right person to support you in there. So finally, reaching AAA conformance is not impossible. There are lots of challenges and decisions that you need to take, but in taking these decisions, you're going to make sure that you allow all your users to understand and operate all the areas of your websites. And in the same way that Sam from OXO built products to help his wife, we should actually aim for the highest standards of our organization's websites to help all our customers. So when you aim for the stars, maybe you'll reach the sky.
Thank you, Gavin.
Thanks, Jonas.
Very good. We're not quite at 29 minutes, but
Close.
almost. We've had some activity going on in the chat, quite some positive energy in there with some sharing of links and pointers. I'll make sure to include that in the follow-up. But I think for now, does anybody have a question for Ivo or for Gavin? I should say also Simon's on the call who also introduced himself. Hey, Simon.
Well done, Simon.
Simon, anything you want to add?
That's a good presentation. Can you hear me? Thank you.
I think geographically you might be the two that are the nearest each other in the UK, but Anything you want to add, Simon? Was this on the nose?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to aim for AAA accessibility for the W3C redesign, and it's challenging, as you point out. We tried to think about it with the design phase, but we're having to kind of, our developers are kind of trying to review things and chat to designers as we go along. But we'll see how far we get. But it's definitely worth doing.
Yeah, definitely. Like you got to aim really high because we know that reality is going to be like slightly lower than that in most cases.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I love that whole process and all the learnings from that. I think there's an amazing amount. And the link we can share, Jonas, again, maybe to that article you published, if you can still see my screen. So much good information here about the V3 process.
So, any other questions in here? Any closing comments from anybody else?
Yeah, I actually have one question. I'm Klaus from Aarhus University. I think, well, my question is, we have sort of built our design system around accessibility as well, and also done a lot of calculation of colors to achieve these contrast ratios. And one of the things I've run into is that sometimes if the background color is very bright, even if when you calculate, say, okay, for this color you need to use on this red color, bright red color, should I use white or black to write on that color? Calculation says write on it with black. But to me, with a perfectly normal functioning vision, except for the glasses, it's actually hard to read. And I think it's a lot better with white on that red color. What is going on there? I don't understand that.
2 points which seem to contradict each other. We have to use the tools because the maths is really important. Because your eye will deceive you much of the time. And so much work has gone into those formulas that, by significantly leading experts. So it's really important, firstly, to use the numbers, but secondly, also to be a human being. And I think there are many examples exactly like what you mentioned, Klaus, where it's just like, actually, probably the white's a better choice. So, yeah, but often you can't actually tell with the eye as well. So you need to use the tool and the human being.
Yeah, exactly. But how do I fix this? Because it's obviously better than white. I mean, in my system, I'm using black because that's what the math tells me. But everybody is telling me every time they see these error messages on that red background in my system, they say, I can't read this. It's horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. I would personally, the best way to solve that is to actually bring in people with different visual disabilities. Choose the personas that are most relevant to your organization. I presume you've probably got a library and so on, so that could be a wide range of personas, but maybe the most popular, what are most important, people who most access it, and then get their opinion. Because the maths is saying they're both good, so then it should be up to whatever your users feel.
So we have one closing question. I'm going to hand it over to Katie in New York.
I have one too, if there's time.
All right, let's see if we can do it. Katie first.
Hello. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. We have been thinking a lot about accessibility across Shopify. We're all doing kind of like a bit of a company-wide audit right now on our products. And I was curious if you know of any resources for like digital products specifically. One thing that has come up, especially on our products, so I work on Shopify email, and the interface for that app is such that, we aren't proposing any sort of like linear workflow for our users. And so I know that like with screen readers and things, it's really important to kind of reinforce the hierarchy of actions and kind of reinforce what would be natural kind of progress for someone. But with that, we're kind of like, okay, how do you establish that when technically we're saying like you can just pop in and do whatever you want in whatever order you want, if you're not limited by anything. So I'm curious if you have guidelines there.
So is that a tool that you're using to? Are you talking about the tool that publishes the emails or the emails themselves?
So we built a first-party marketing platform.
Ah,
So
okay, so it is the tool.
email.
The W3 have another guidelines which are very much related to the WCAG, which is specifically around accessibility for products. We can share that link as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But I'd be happy to catch up with you if you want to go through products.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
All right, and then last but not least, we'll do Hillary.
So my question is that some of the accessibility guidelines refer to visual things and some refer to content things which you mentioned and yes, awesome talk.
Thank you.
Which ones are more challenging to make sure the organization enforces? Because they're different teams on the client side of things.
Yeah. Oh, it would vary by organization for sure. What we see is three main owners: the content team, as you've just mentioned, the design team, such as I presume Klaus, and then the development team. And what we try to do is we'll look at an organization and then try to group things based on their personas. So what are the needs of their users, and then look at the kind of where the website is not complying and group those by the content team, the design team, the development team, and levels of priority. So then send them out because you might find a content person, she's going to be able to deal with this this part of her week, whereas a developer can only deal with their changes in 5 months time or something.
Sure.
So it's kind of
content is like the ongoing work, right? The developer does it once and then it's done forever. Where the content person has to do it on this page today, that page tomorrow, this stuff,
exactly.
the next day. It is the ongoing work. So I would imagine that the content work and enforcing it ongoing through the use of training and tech specifications probably is the more challenging part.
And system design, building the right CMS so that helps the content person to stick to the guidelines as well.
Yeah.
But you definitely mentioned the training for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's all for now. Gavin will share another link. I have a few resources on my list, but for now, I'll just say thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and a big thank you to Gavin.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, everyone.
All right. We'll talk soon. Cheers. Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks.